So here we have a clip of an interview on the Diary of a CEO podcast with the Vice President of the United States, JD Vance. And there are some key lessons I want us to just take from this clip. So let's go through the clip first before we say anything.
Before then, you weren't friends.
No, that's right.
You were quite critical of Donald Trump before then. And you've been probably asked this a million times, but when I actually didn't know this until literally today.
Okay.
I read the piece you'd written in The Atlantic where you criticised him for taking advantage of the struggling working class. What Trump offers, this is your quote, is an easy escape from pain. To every complex problem, he promises a simple solution. He can bring jobs back simply by punishing offshore companies into submission. As he told a New Hampshire crowd, folks are too similar with the opioid Scrooge. He can cure the addiction epidemic by building a Mexican wall and keeping the cartels out. He will spare the United States from humiliation and military defeat with indiscriminate bombing. It doesn't matter that no credible military leader has endorsed his plan. He never offers detail for those plans to work because Trump is cultural heroin. He makes some people feel better, but he cannot fix all that ails them, and one day they'll realize it. Very tough words against Trump.
Long time ago, but
2016 and 10 years ago. What changed?
Well, let me pick up first.
Wait, before he continues, so this is JD Vance, right? Before he became that writing was, he wrote that before he became VP. So that was many years ago. So that was him criticizing Trump. So yeah, I hope you get the flow of thought. Let's continue.
First of all, I think you always have to be able to acknowledge when you're right and when you're wrong. And there was a lot I was right about in 2016, but just pick up on something. Can you read the line for me again where I talk about no credible military leader has endorsed these plans?
Yeah, it says, it doesn't matter that no credible military leader has endorsed his plan.
Okay. So what I would say is I wrote that. I believed it when I wrote it. And reading it now, I'm almost embarrassed that I wrote it because it was so obviously absurd. In fact, the fact that Donald Trump was misaligned with the military experts and the military leadership of 2016 was a good thing, not a bad thing. Think about those military leaders. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the troops, the people who serve, the people who put on a uniform, but you could make a very credible argument that from the early 90s until at least 2016, America hadn't won a war in 30 years. Like, there's a reason why Donald Trump mistrusted the military leadership, and he was right. And so much of what I think the president represented at the time was a recognition that American institutions had become sclerotic and broken, and he was a weapon to break down those institutions.
Your assessment of him is similar to the Democratic assessment of him. Your assessment of him back in 2016 is similar to the Democratic assessment of him. There was a private message between you and a roommate where you said he was either a cynical arsehole or America's Hitler. How do you go from that position to vice president of the same person? What is that journey?
A crazy journey, man. But again, I mean, it's you have to ask yourself, first of all, I thought Donald Trump would be a failed president if he got elected. He was not. I thought that America's institutions were fundamentally functioning. They were not. I thought that the military leaders who told us this about a war, or the scientific experts who told us this other thing about a pandemic, were fundamentally, maybe not always right, but fundamentally wise people who were mostly right. I was wrong.
What have you observed behind the scenes that JD didn't see? So in operation, when you see him making decisions.
So, I mean, I want to caveat this with saying that, I didn't know him well by the time, I voted for him in 2020. Obviously, very, very involved in the 2024 campaign well before I was ever his vice presidential nominee. I had that change based purely on what I saw from the outside. It's not like I had insider knowledge about Donald Trump, and that's what caused me to change. Now, what I will say is that having the insider knowledge, one thing that really mistakes or gets wrong, that piece in the Atlantic, that's where that piece was published, is that Donald Trump is much different as a human being than the media makes him out to be. He's very warm. He's a very loving person to his kids, to his grandkids. He's incredibly generous. Like, if you see Donald Trump, in the Oval Office, it's like he has to give you a gift. Like he has to, whether it's, a water bottle or a MAGA hat or a coin or a pin. Like he's one of these people who he really likes hospitality. He really likes making other people happy. I had no understanding of that from him from the outside. What I would see is, clips of him arguing with a journalist, and that was it. And that gives you a very, very one-dimensional view of a person. So yeah, I definitely from the inside have seen a much, much more multi-dimensional figure. The thing I say about Donald Trump is I remember this in 2016. And in hindsight, it's just so, so dumb. People would say that he was dumb or that he wasn't very smart. He's super smart. Like he reads a lot. He understands people at an instinctual level better than anybody that I've ever known. But he is a very, very, like from a pure IQ perspective, he's a very smart person.
You see, there are a lot of things we can take away from this clip. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, but some of the major lessons I think I will just point out to you, to us, is number one, it is stop trying to please the crowd. I've always said that, and I'll keep saying it. Stop trying to please the crowd. Because the crowd says go left, right? If you listen to what they said, because the military generals, because the analysts, they all said, oh, we should do this. But then Donald Trump was, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the opposite, right? Stop trying to, because, it's public opinion, it's popular opinion. The crowd can actually be wrong. Because it's a multitude, because the crowd is saying one thing does not make the crowd correct. And another thing I would like to take away from that is, it is maturity. It is maturity to admit that you are wrong or that you were wrong. It is actually maturity. It's only babies and children that would say, "Oh, I still stand by what I said 5 years ago," even in the presence of multiple evidence, even in the presence of everything, you still stand by, just because you don't want to feel shame, just because of pride, just because of our ego. It is maturity to actually admit that you are wrong, and that is one thing I love the VP for. And another thing I would like to point out is yes, is remove the how do I put this now, separate the criticism from the person. Okay, separate the criticism from the person, or separate the wrong, separate the evil from the human being. Human beings can change. Humans will always change. All right. So if Donald Trump had looked back and said, "Oh, this same JD Vance that criticizes me in 2016, I cannot pick this person for VP," right? Or if JD Vance had not grown, had not, let me use the word matured. Let me just use that word, right? Has not changed their attention, has not gotten to know better, right? He would have said, this same Trump, So separate the criticism, separate the evil, separate the act from the human being. Yes, humans can be wrong. Yes, if you feel like you are never going to make any mistake, if you feel like everything you do is correct, everything you are doing is correct, then you have a lot to learn actually, because there are some things you will do, there are some words you will say, there are some actions you will take that later in hindsight you will discover that you were actually wrong. And accepting that fact that I was wrong is actually maturity. And also separating the person, the human being, from the action, from the criticism, from the evil is also a level of maturity. It takes a level of maturity to do that one also. So yeah, those are just a few of the things I would like to point out. And of course, there are a lot of other things we can also point out from this same clip, right? Don't judge people from afar. Don't just conclude on human beings and, literally condemn them in your mind like, no, I will never have anything to do with them, blah, 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 until you actually get to know them up close. You hear what he said? He said, from what he had seen on media, on the internet, it was just clips of Donald Trump arguing with journalists and all that. And yeah, there are a lot of clips like that. But then when they got to know him up close, right, you heard what he said about Donald Trump. If you go to his office, he's almost willing, he must give you something, all those kind of stuff. So never just conclude on any human being, right, without getting to know them up close. Okay? So yeah, there is good in every human being. That one is for sure. There is good in every human being. Of course, some humans are bad, some people are just evil, but there is good in every human. So yeah, I hope you learned something, and I hope this was really helpful. So yeah, see you next time. Bye.